Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to Live in the Splash Zone with a marine scientist. Tonight, we have a very special guest joining us all the way from Sri Lanka. It is esteemed marine biologist, blue whale researcher, pioneer, ocean educator, and one of UWA's very favorite alumni. It is Asha De Vos. Welcome to the show, Asha. So, Asha, thank you for joining us all the way from Sri Lanka. As tradition dictates, I have to go through the highlights of your CV, and it is going to be highlights only because I've got about like ream this thick in front of me. But going down the list, you have degrees from St Andrews, from Oxford, and UWA. You are the first and only Sri Lankan with a PhD in marine mammal research. You're the first Pew Fellow in marine conservation, the first National Geographic Explorer from Sri Lanka as well. Going down the list still further, you're the founder of the Sri Lankan Blue Whale Project and Oceanswell. You're also one of the BBC 100 women. It's quite an incredible CV indeed, and we're going to get to know you pretty well over the course of the show. But I want to get started with, I guess, the beginning. When you were growing up, I'm guessing you didn't sit down and think to yourself, I'm going to be all of these things. I'm going to sit here one day in 20 years and I'll have this list of achievements in front of me. When did your interest in marine science first start? There
And
we
so,
go.
so my mom is convinced that my love for the ocean really began when she took me out on this glass bottom boat when I was 2 weeks old. And if you can see the photograph, which I can't see at the moment, by the way, I should point out, then like you'll see that I'm clearly not very functional. I'm not really paying attention to anything, and I don't know how much it influenced my life. But I've learned the hard way not to argue with my mom, so I'm just going to nod every time she says that. But I know that it all kind of began when I was more like 6 years old, so a little bit down the line. I have an older brother. We were brought up to be very free, curious kids. I didn't grow up in a beach-going family, which is really important to note, right? And we were the kind of kids who, had like caterpillars and scorpions in our bedroom, and we'd watch, caterpillars turn to butterflies. And so those were our science classrooms, right? That's what we learned through experience, which I'm super grateful for. And so that love for kind of science, that initial love, made me want to become an adventurous scientist. And couple that with, these National Geographic magazines that my parents would bring home, I'd look through and I'd be like seeing these places and spaces, and I'd be like, I want to go where no one else will ever go and see what no one else will ever see. And that was so important to me as a child. And I gradually fell in love with water, became a swimmer. So, that space seemed like, wow, like, this water, this liquid, and I could see the ocean, which intrigued me. I also had the privilege, I used to train at a swimming pool, and after my swims, I'd come out and I'd sit and I'd
So I love this story because this story feels like it's fake.
Yeah, and this is what people love to think it's fake, but I have a book, right, which is autographed to me, so it's not fake. So Sir Arthur C. Clarke, the famed science fiction writer who wrote 2001 Space Odyssey, who also is one of the kind of forefathers of satellite technology, used to come to the swimming club because he moved from the UK to Sri Lanka to dive our wrecks, right? And he would tell me these stories. And this one story I'm going to tell you guys, and I bet you all want to become marine scientists after this, right? He was like, I was on this dive and this skin went past. And I was like, what was it? And he said, it was this brown skin. And I was like, okay. And he said, it kept going and going. And I was like, okay, so what was it? And he goes, I don't know, because I had to end my dive. And I was like,
so you didn't actually discover anything?
Right? Well, see, this is my thing. I'm not sure if he didn't see anything, or like he may have seen something that he didn't recognize.
That doesn't seem right. If you were to see a strange shape going past, you would wait until you would try and find out, right?
Well, unless you ran out of air, and then it would be like, right? So, but the other hand, maybe he didn't. Maybe it was just something he used to kind of intrigue a child, right? And it worked, right? Like, look at where I am. This is kind of my life now. Thanks, Uncle Arthur. But and so it kind of progressed from there. So when I was 18, I was like, I want to be a marine biologist, and I was very resolute. And my parents were like, okay, do what you love, and you'll do it well. I don't think they really knew what that meant. And everybody else around me, I mean, I come from a culture where being a marine biologist is unheard of. And people were like, what are you going to do with that degree? And I was like, it's a beautiful tropical island.
You do something with it.
Yeah.
So was it pretty obvious after that? So obviously early on you knew that you were a bit of an adventurer. You wanted to always find out new things, right? And then there's that wonderful moment with Arthur C. Clarke, which is still a story I'm a little bit dubious about. where through his wonderful storytelling, he told you a story that inspired a bit more of your curiosity. From there, what was the rest of the journey like?
I mean, so, like now when I relate it, it sounds like a straight line trajectory, but it never is, right? Like, I mean, that's what it is. I went through school, like, my university process, I kind of applied and I got into the school I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked St. Andrews because they have a very strong marine mammal program. It's one of the top programs in the world. And I had a sense that's the path I wanted to go down, but I didn't know how it was going to work in Sri Lanka because I didn't know if we had sort of whales and dolphins in this country because most people in Sri Lanka didn't really know that. Okay.
Even though you're just right by the coast.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? So culturally, and this is something that I think people don't realize is culturally, a lot of countries in the developing world, and I'll use that term here, the ocean is a space of extraction, right? And it's it's an economic space. It's not for recreation or kind of protection or conservation. It seems
it's very practical.
It's very practical, exactly. And so I think when I was telling people I want to be a marine biologist, they were kind of almost concerned. And today I joke and I say, oh, maybe they thought I was going to university and going to become a fisherwoman because that's the only vocation they could associate with the ocean, right? And I was like, oh no, I'll carve my own niche. So confident. I had no idea what I was going to do, FYI. But I had kind of, set the bar high for myself.
Yeah.
And people just assumed I would go off to university and not come back. I had to leave because I couldn't study to be a marine biologist here.
But so that's really interesting because we called you a pioneer, which I think is a word that gets thrown about perhaps a little bit more than it should. But in your case, you would literally were you the first marine biologist, I guess, that you would ever come in contact with?
So the first I had come in contact with in my, up to 18, 19, 20. So we do have a handful of marine biologists in Sri Lanka. But a lot of them will be more academic or working kind of not like field-related jobs, quite the way I do. Sort of my, I guess I'm kind of this weird morph, right? Like I do a lot of fieldwork and science, but also conservation, and I kind of bring them all together. And that sort of fits my personality really well. But yeah, and that's all the stuff like I kind of fell in love with when I went to university. And then at the end of my degree, I was like, okay, I have theory, right? Like, and theory is great. Everybody always remember foundation is, the theory is really important, but you have to try it out, right? Like you have to test the waters. No pun intended.
Pun very much intended, I think. Pun always intended, yeah.
But you're going to have to test the waters and see what it's really like, right? And so after my undergrad, I say, I was like, okay, I got to go get some practical experience, right? Like see what a biologist really does. And I remember at that time, I always, my story with my parents is always so seamless. But the reality is, I had to prove myself to them as well. As much as they were supportive, right? I had to keep kind of convincing them every step of the way. So here I was, a young Sri Lankan girl. And I was like, I'm going to, take a backpack and I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to live, just volunteer. And I'm not going to sure how I'm going to survive, but I'm going to kind of do this because I need to, right? And I'm just, again, being Sri Lankan, I have restrictions about where I can travel and where I can just turn up. So New Zealand was a country that was very open to a volunteer.
So this is just after St. Andrews?
Straight after St. Andrews.
Okay, so it goes Sri Lanka, big dreams, Arthur C. Clarke. You're going to go out and do the first thing.
I love how Arthur C. Clarke is such a
that is a landmark moment. No pun intended also. And then St. Andrews happened. So you did your undergrad. And so after undergrad.
And then I went off and I loved St. Andrews, just if anyone's ever thinking about going there, it's possibly the best decision I made for myself at that time. But yeah, so I had to go to New Zealand. I didn't have any money, so I took on two jobs.
Classic post-uni problem.
Right? And so one was, I was in a call center, working in a university call center. The thing I should probably confess to here is that I'm phonophobic, right? I'm self-diagnosed. I freak out when I have to answer the phone. It's this weird thing. I don't like talking on the phone, even though I'm clearly comfortable talking, right?
You've chosen an odd career for yourself if you don't like talking, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just the phone. It's just that kind of thing. Okay. And I worked
So you're spending there your days at the call center, just trying to make ends meet. You just graduated. You're not a fisherwoman. You are a budding marine biologist.
Budding with nowhere to go. And then the other job I did was actually I was a a tatty roger, right? A tatty roger, tatties are
What?
potatoes. Yeah.
Okay, a potato. Oh, this is Scottish slang.
Scottish
Nice.
slang.
Okay.
So basically my job was to dig rotting potatoes out of potato fields. And, we always think about Scotland as dark and grey, and it's beautiful, but grey and gloomy and rainy, which it was for my entire time studying there, pretty much. But these like multiple weeks where I was working in these potato fields, it was scorching hot, right? So it was kind of the most ridiculous situation. But I did that job. I earned some money, managed to convince my parents, got my visa, went to New Zealand, turned up in New Zealand, realized I didn't have money to like kind of live in a house. So I lived in a tent for the best part of 6 months.
Let me bring that picture up, because this is
it's a classic.
A perfect illustration of student hardship and of passion and dedication and
joy.
I guess optimism beyond reasonable hope. Here it is. This is you looking.
Yeah.
What is that expression on your? What are you feeling? Do you remember? Like, what was the feeling at that time?
So I think what had happened that morning was there was, New Zealand and sheep, right? And I think we'd been stampeded by some sheep, a tent. And I think I was that myself. Yeah. And I think, I think I'd cycled quite a bit. Like, this was probably in the middle of this cycle ride that I did because I felt like I could for 9 days around New Zealand, which I first thought was flat, which please note, everybody, New Zealand's not flat. And
I think most of us knew.
I didn't know how to read maps. I still probably don't. That's why I work on the ocean. There's no like changes right on the surface. But it was like every day 70 kilometers, and then we can end up here, and I'm in the tent. And I think I woke up that morning with the realization that I had like another 70 kilometers to go, and I've been, stampeded by sheep. And I suppose that's kind of what I'm looking like there. But it's memorable, right? Like that's what life is about to me. It's like these stories that make it more memorable. Like if I had a straight line trajectory, you wouldn't want to talk to me. Right?
Going back to the New Zealand decision, why were you there? Because I'm getting a sense that this is not the holiday of your dreams.
No. I mean, if it was, then it's a disappointing holiday. Just look at my tent life. I went to volunteer, and I volunteered on 4 different projects. And I it was all free, and I couldn't afford to like live, right? So I lived in this tent for the best part of 6 months and fed myself mostly boiled eggs.
Okay.
Which were
high in protein.
Yeah, high in protein. And a lot of goodwill from people who probably felt like I looked homeless. And it was really important to me. But while I was in New Zealand, the one promise I made my parents was that I would email them every day, right? And so this is back in the day when email was new. It was dial-up, right? So it was a whole different system. No phones with like Wi-Fi and all this jazz that we have today. And so I would go to these internet cafes, pay the little bit of money I had, check my email. And I got
Mom and Dad, I'm alive today.
Yeah. And I'm there's always a delay in responses in email back in the day. So, I guess they were happy when they first finally found out. But the key thing that happened then was that I got an email from my undergraduate thesis supervisor. And his name is Jonathan Gordon. And he wrote to me and he said, there's a whale research vessel that's circumnavigating the globe. It'll stop in the Maldives and it'll stop in Sri Lanka. You should try to get on. And that was really all I needed, right? I was like, I'm on it. Got it. So I emailed the owner of this vessel. So I'm still in New Zealand. I'm living in a tent, using internet cafes, emailed the owner of the vessel and like, hi, I'm Sri Lankan. I'm like the first person who really wants to go into the science of like understanding whales. I'd love an opportunity on your vessel. It's coming our way anyways. These opportunities never happen.
Mm-hmm. You've got to seize it while it's here.
Yeah. And then I like sent it off. And as I said, there's a delay. So I had to leave it and come back the next day and check if I had a response. And I did. And I was so like, I couldn't believe it. Right. And I opened it super eager. And it just said, and thank you for your email. Unfortunately, we have no space. So we wish you luck, which is really kind of them.
So no. So just a flat out no.
I didn't want luck, right? Like that's not what I wanted. I wanted an opportunity. So I spent the best part of 3 months basically writing to them every day, bargaining, right? Like telling them what I would do, which was basically I will do anything. Let me come on for a day. Let me just see the vessel. Let me like whatever. Please understand this is so meaningful to me. And finally, I think I convinced them with my mad skill. I'm not sure what it was, but it worked.
It's your tenacious attitude. It's your willingness to to suffer for your passion. It's going above and beyond.
Yeah, they might have been a bit worried that I wouldn't stop, which also possibly played into it. But also, like, I wasn't like, and I always point this out, like, I wasn't like a demanding child. Like, I wasn't being a brat about it. I wasn't like, you need to get me on. I was very much willing to just do anything, which, as it turned out, was exactly what happened. They said, if you can be with us in the Maldives in 24 hours, you can stay with us for 2 weeks. And I was like, I'm in.
24-hour notice.
Yeah. So packing, everything, running out the door, like back, I fly, anyway, get to the Maldives. I think they were like, whoa, she's here. Like, okay, that was
We weren't expecting her to turn around.
I was like, I passed the test, didn't I? And they were like, okay. And they were like, well, welcome. We're really happy to welcome you as our deckhand. And I was like, okay. And they're like, you will be cleaning toilets and polishing brass. And I was like, cool. I was super excited. Because to me, the most important thing was that I was on board. Because once I got on board, they weren't going to toss me out in the middle of the ocean. Like, let's be honest, right? But I felt like I could prove myself and kind of work my way into position where I could do more science and start my marine biology career. So that's kind of how I thought. And that's basically what happened. And I stayed on for 2 weeks. They loved me because I worked so hard. I like shined the toilet bowl so well. You could see your own face in it, things like that. To the point where they were just like, okay, you can start doing some science. And then I was upgraded to science intern and deckhand.
Oh, very nice. So sometimes you would scrub the toilets, but in between you might get to look at some samples.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. It was pretty phenomenal.
So the tent happened, and you got your first opportunity in the field of your dreams. What happens next?
So while I was on this opportunity, full on deckhanding, I went from the Maldives because they were like, you can stay with us. We're going to go to Sri Lanka. You'll stay with us for 6 months while we work there. I was like, okay, this is great, right? Like, my dream was to work in Sri Lanka, and I was like, wow, I'm going to our waters, which, I mean, I can still remember the excitement of just crossing the invisible exclusive economic zone line from the Maldives to Sri Lanka and being like, I'm home, right? Like, there's no difference. But I knew I'd cross that line. And I was like, I am now serving my country. And I was so happy, right? But the key, like the pivotal point, like this, the most important point of my whole career happened during this expedition. And that was, we were off the southeast coast of the island, and we were out at sea. It was a beautiful, flat, calm day, not a ripple in sight. And we was, working, at that time, the vessel was working with sperm whales. We were tracking them, eavesdropping on their world, dropping underwater microphones in the water, eavesdropping, following them, and taking these tiny samples to understand how, like, the toxins in the ocean environment. And while we were doing this, one day, and we'd always have someone on deck looking out for signs of life, right, during the daylight hours. And I was on deck. It was my shift, and we were hearing these sperm whales, right? We played on loudspeaker in the vessel. So it's really
amazing.
It's magical, right? And I knew they were around, but I couldn't see them. And I was getting really frustrated because I was like, I want to be the one to see them today. It's such a beautiful day and it'd be amazing. And I knew there were lots of them around. And so as we started, cruising into the distance, like we started moving forward, I suddenly saw this massive, big exhalation or spout or blow, right? Yeah. And I knew immediately it wasn't a sperm whale, because sperm whales have a blowhole on the left-hand side of their weirdly square heads. And so when they exhale, it goes off onto the side. They're so weird.
I didn't know that. I'm learning something new today.
Yeah, no, they're so weird, but they're so cute. And I don't mean to sound like an emotional scientist, but it's true. So they exhale, it goes off onto the left-hand side. But blue whales, right, when they exhale, they're the biggest animal that's ever lived. Their lungs are giant. They're so powerful. They're enormous hearts, right, which is a key thing. And when they exhale, right, it's this powerful, vertical, kind of like 12-foot exhalation, right? So I see this in the distance, and I call down to my captain on walkie-talkie. I'm like, Bob, we have to go. It's like, 11 o'clock, 2 kilometers. And he's like, where and why? And I'm like, I think it's a blue whale, right? And he goes, fine. And, I'm a deckhand, right? Yeah. Now I've just changed the course. And I know Chari's in the room, right? Like, these are all predetermined lines, right? Like, every expedition is so well planned, and you're on these lines for a reason. And here I'm like, not this way, guys. Let's go that way. I saw a blue whale. And I'm like, ooh, like panicking. And then I'm like staring because I'm so scared that I'm going to lose sight. And my eyes are like watering, like the sun and the glare in my eyes are not
goodness.
blinking. It's kind of manic, right? And then I thought I was losing my mind because I'm seeing not just one blue whale, but like there's 6 blue whales in an area the size of a football
See, how
field.
rare is that? Because I know nothing about whales, almost nothing.
So blue whales tend to be solitary, right?
Okay.
You often see them, but they'll be hanging out on their own. And that's the case with large whales, baleen whales, the ones which have like comb-like structures in their mouths that they use to filter feed the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing them aggregate is usually, and that's exactly what I thought, right? I was like, there's all these whales, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, what does my textbook and my professor say, right? And it was like, blue whales, like all large whales, will go to cold waters to feed, right? And come to warm waters to breed and calve. And so I was like, well, they must be breeding and calving because we're like 5 degrees above the equator. It's tropical, super tropical. And I was like, I'll see babies and maybe like mating, right? Like I was like, this is cool. Very excited. We're moving forward. I'm getting all excited. And then we get closer and closer and closer. And they're definitely not mating. I know. And there's no babies. So I'm like, this is
So it's just
crazy.
6 hanging out together. That's weird.
Just hanging out, right? And I'm like, this is weird. This is not what they're supposed to be doing. And so then I'm like now guilty, right? Like I've changed the course of an expedition. And I'm on the lowest rung of this whole ladder, right? I'm like deckhand, just made it to Sciencington. And I said to my
You're
captain,
only half a deckhand, you're also, of course.
Yeah, exactly, like half and half. And I'm like, I said to Bob, I said, can we just stay for a little long? And he's like, sure. And he was this amazing captain. And, I'm so glad we did because literally like 10 minutes later, one of them pooped, right? And I didn't include a photograph of whale poop, which I should have, which is kind of unusual for me. But just Google it, blue whale poop, right? It's this beautiful red color. It's brick red. Okay, no joke.
That is unexpected.
Totally unexpected. I want you to use your imagination now.
Yeah,
but it's more unexpected because it's not just that the color is amazing, but it's also like they're pooping. And I was like, if they're pooping, they're feeding, but they're supposed to feed in cold waters, but these are warm waters. And I was like, this is my eureka moment because these whales were doing something different. And literally my whole life, like that was the moment that changed where I was going with life.
So was that the first time you sighted a blue whale in your career?
Pretty much. I'd seen one as soon as we crossed the EEZ to Sri Lanka, but very briefly. But this was like my first proper encounter. Wow. I should point out, I didn't actually see a whale. I did my undergraduate thesis research on sperm whale acoustics, but I never had seen a whale even at that point. And I saw my first whale when I went to New Zealand and I saw a sperm whale. And 2 weeks later, I was on this vessel kind of like scouring, the Indian Ocean for sperm whales. So yeah, very late in life. It was very cool though.
You're back to Sri Lanka. So finally you're there. You're back. It's
Yeah.
really odd because you're back home, but of course nobody's ever really, or you haven't really studied that area before.
Yeah.
So what, I guess, motivates your interest in local science? Like what's so special about being back where you are rather than roaming the globe? Because for a lot of people, roaming the globe is one of the perks of being a scientist, but for you, it's coming back home.
So when I left Sri Lanka, I always promised I would go back. I am like, I'm definitely like Sri Lanka is in my blood, which is a huge thing. And I wanted to always serve my country because I felt like the life I've led and everything I've experienced is great. I'm very grateful to be Sri Lankan with everything else that goes on in this country. I think it's an incredible country. And for me, I think local scientists are so important, right? Like, so marine conservation, and this is what I believe, marine conservation, we haven't really progressed, right? Business as usual has not worked. The system is not working. It's falling apart. We know systems are dying. Species are going extinct. There's so many problems, right? And there's lots of reasons why. But I think one of the things is that we also have to start to create armies of people who care for the ocean. 70% of our planet is oceans, but what percentage of our population actually works for the ocean, right? And that's my big question. Okay. I mean, the ocean is a common resource. We all have a responsibility to look after it, but it always falls on the shoulders of a few of us who take on this responsibility, right? For the sake of everyone else. And I think that, a handful of people anywhere in the world can't solve the problem. But I don't think a handful of scientists from, say, the Western world or the developed world can resolve the problems of the entire world. Right. I think the model, and that's the model of parachute science, where you have people coming from outside, coming into our countries because there are these exotic problems that they can get involved in, beautiful sites and stuff like that. And they do work, but there's no investment in the human capacity on the ground. There's no building of infrastructure or any capacity development that can allow conservation to be sustainable. So to me, it cripples conservation because when they're there, it's happening. When they're gone, it's gone. The money's gone, the people are gone, the expertise is gone.
Okay, so it's non-continuous and it's not an investment.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so then if a problem comes up again, like, these countries now, our countries like mine are just crippled because we don't know what to do because we were never told what to do, right? And it's, and people go off and it's all about the publications and stuff like that, which is a huge driving factor for wanting to be the first, like the person. But the greatest scientist to me, like my mentors, right? And one of them is on here, and he's Sri Lankan. He lives in Australia, but he's dedicated his life there, and he does work with us. I mean, he's built my capacity, right? I did my PhD with Chari, who's a professor there, and the point is, like, his legacy is going to live so much longer than the lifespan of one research publication. His legacy is me, right? So when people see me, they know I'm one of his students, and I'm carrying on the mission that he had. Right? And he's contributing to his country. He may not live here, but he's still giving back. And that's the point. The point is we have to shift. Like, what is the priority? Is the priority ego, right? Is it about like you being the PI and the face of everything? Or is it really about changing, saving our oceans, making a difference, making sure that it's in some good nick when we pass it on to the next generation? Right. And I think COVID-19 is a perfect example of why parachute science doesn't work. Because if you run projects across the world and now we can't travel and we're stuck in our own countries, like that project is now falling apart because nobody can look after it.
Because they've gone home.
They've gone home, right? But if you train the people on the ground, and I know friends who are now telling me, you're so right, because their projects are stalled and they're losing data. They're losing so much valuable information just by not having invested in the people in the communities on the ground to do the work themselves. And you're never not part of there's a place for you. You train, you build capacity, but you're part of the project, but you don't have to be present on the ground. And I think that is the most important thing to remember. And I genuinely, like, my mentors are these amazing people who have set me up to live and work and invest in my own country by investing in me. And that's their legacy. And I hope they're proud of it.
But of course, you're passing it on yourself. This is a good time, I think, to talk about your teaching. We've got a couple of pictures. I've got one on what you might call informal teaching.
Yes.
It's you in a boat with a couple of students. So talk me through this. You talked a lot about, obviously, building up skills. What, in your mind, is good education? Like, what are you trying to give to your pupils that sets them apart and sets them up for life to carry on the mission long after maybe you've stopped?
Yeah. Okay, so that's my driving factor, right? I say when I die, I don't want it to all end. It's a waste of my life, right? So I'm all about giving away everything. Like, all my knowledge is for other people. So if someone's interested and keen and kind of like wants to know, like, it's all theirs, right? That's it. What I can say is, for me, good education is a whole bunch of things. I think it's time outdoors. It's and it's based on what I was brought up with. It's good morals, values, and ethics, whether it's to people or the planet, right? And that's all part of it. And it's also good education is something that serves you to live the life that you want to live, right? That's important. But for me, I think I call myself an informal educator because I find systems very confining. So if they're set up and there's a specific place, and if I have to go back and teach the same course year after year, I don't think I would cope very well. And that's just a personality thing. But I love informal teaching. So like, if you happen to be on my board, like if something triggers me and there's a piece of knowledge that I can share, I'm
there's
like,
a teachable moment everywhere.
I'm like, totally. And and I know, like, the students and interns that I have, they enjoy it because they know I'm like, take it, right? So I'll quiz them. I'll be like, okay, so you just saw a dolphin, right? In the morning we had another dolphin. What do you see as the differences? What are the physical differences? Okay, so now you've seen the physical differences. What are the behavior? So everything is a teaching moment. And I love, and it's what I revel in, right? I love seeing their faces light up as they realize that now they can, like, tell the difference between these dolphins, or they can understand why that behavior is happening, right? But it doesn't feel like, okay, today's class is about this species versus species, you know what I mean? And it's
exactly. So it's through experience rather than sitting down and learning the theory. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and so we run these field courses, and we did one last year, and we want to continue doing them every year, and that was for 10 local students. We took them out to the East Coast, and we basically, we had like a small class in the morning, and these are, like, we don't still have marine conservation or marine biology as a degree program here. There are sort of fisheries modules or oceanography modules that you can do, but you can't do a degree. So, and also these field experiences, not everybody gets the chance to go on. So we took these students, and I do a little class, and then in the afternoon or the next morning, we'd get out in the field. So we talked about different kinds of turtles. We talked about kind of coral bleaching and stuff. And then I took them snorkeling, and there was a hawksbill turtle, and they were like, "That's a hawksbill turtle." And I was like, "That's right. And you know that, right?" And I took them, and they saw some bleaching, right? And there was this is the onset of a new bleaching event. And one of the students just looked up, and I didn't say anything because I knew what was happening. And he said, I think I can see bleaching. And I said, you know what? Now you're empowered to know. You're not just swimming passively through the world. You're a empowered, knowledgeable individual that can share what you know, right? And there's so much power in that, I think, in those experiences. And not everybody gets them, but there's lots of different ways to provide people with those experiences, I think. And I think the other thing I love to teach is skills, right? So we ran a skills building course, which we're actually doing. We're going to create an online version of it, an extended version. And I call it skills that where we all, as scientists and early career researchers, are meant to know, but nobody really ever teaches us.
So these are the so-called soft skills, or the hidden skills that you kind of you're expected to just imbibe them by osmosis. You know, like you sit there long enough, if you scrub enough toilets, or if you camp in enough tents, you might imbibe the knowledge. So this is specifically about addressing that. Is this the one, the skills building photo?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, let me just flash that up. That's quite a big cohort.
Yeah, so that was a big class. We brought National Geographic in as a partner, and we had some talks from some explorers. So there were 4 of us explorers who spoke, because I wanted these students to see the wide variety of things like possible for them. And then we all taught a module. So we taught, preparing for the field, how to write a grant, how to, take good photographs for like kind of conservation impact, how to do social media that's impactful for the work you do, right? And we are broadened the course. There's 10 modules in the online version that we're building. But these are, I remember, and the reason I did this, right, is I remember the first time I had in my master's, a professor sent a paper to me and was like, can you review this? I don't have time. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. Like, review this paper of a scientist who's like this gigantic name in the business, right? I was like, so easily done. And I just remember just dying, right? Like because I didn't want to tell my professor I didn't know how to do it.
Of course, I didn't disappoint someone.
And he wasn't exactly going to he wasn't exactly like, let's talk about how you do it. It was just like, do it. Like, okay.
So it's implied that you already know.
Yeah, implied. And I don't know where that teaching came from, or the experience, right? So it's teaching skills. It's just, giving people the opportunity and a little bit of confidence, giving them 10 tips. Here's how you write a paper. Here's how you read a paper. Here's how you write a budget, right? Like, these are skills that we all need, and we got to start somewhere. We can't pretend that everyone's born with it, because no one's born with it. So that's kind of like, so for me, it's like, how do you create? I think you can learn a lot about, the science of a whale by reading. Like, everything's available, but these are the skills that you cannot necessarily get from the internet.
This is like the behind the scenes, the business side of science, isn't it? This is how it works. This is, I guess the analogy is, this is the skeletons and the muscle structure and how everything all fits together, which unfortunately you don't get to learn, most of us, unless you're already doing it, by which time you're knee deep, looking around, wondering what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is sort of like one of my things, also the driving factors. I always say, in science, we have this like, this whole opinion of a final product. Everything's a finished product, right? Like, you meet a professor, and they're like, all you know about them is like the papers you've read that they've written. And all the papers, mind you, were like top-notch journals, perfect. Because nobody's really told you that it went through 75 iterations to get to that point, right? So you don't realize that, right? And so when you're writing your first paper, your assumption is that that's how it has to be perfect the first time you write it, and that's not real. Let's be honest. And then you meet this person, and they've got all these papers, they've got all these students, they've got all this money, and nobody's stopped to tell you how they got to that point, right? So it's very hard. It's very unrelatable because you cannot become that person if you don't know what steps they took to get there. And even if you aspire to be them, if nobody turns around and says, hey, you know what? I had a rocky road too, right? Like I cleaned toilets. I didn't grow up. I wasn't born with a scuba tank on my back. Like this is my story. And I think if we shared more of the human stories around science, I think we'd be creating a much more inclusive culture and also making space for people to feel like they belong and that they can grow.
That's a beautiful sentiment. Hey, talking about non-linear journeys and taking a few troughs as well as the peaks, you've been through a lot. We talked about a few hardships already. What sort of advice do you have for anyone who's maybe struggling to make it through? Like, how do you, in your life, make it through the difficult times?
So I'd say my best advice is like, you know what, the challenges are the best part of the story, right? And it doesn't seem like it at the time, okay? But always remember challenges are things that you can climb over or walk around. There's never a big enough wall in this world that you can't actually get across if you want to, right?
But you got to want to.
You got to want to, right? And so it takes a lot of hard work. Yeah, and it's a lot of hard work. But anything you want badly in life takes a lot of hard work. Right. And so just be prepared for that. But just know that the challenges are there. You can get across them. You can get around them. But they also make the journey so much more beautiful. Right. They give you so much appreciation for all the good times when things happen. You're like, you know what? This is amazing. And I did this. And I got here by doing all of that. Right. And with all the ups and downs and everything that I've been through, people sometimes say to me, like, if you could go back and change one thing, what would it be? And I said this actually in my graduation address at UW last year. I said, I wouldn't change anything because if I changed a single thing, I wouldn't be here, right this spot, right
It's all part of the journey.
It's all part of the journey. And I am the culmination of every single step I've taken today from the day I was born.
Hey, Asha, we've actually got a really interesting question in the chat log. Speaking of hard times and troughs and now, this is from Charlotte Aston, who saw you talk at graduation 2019. I was in awe of you, still am. I wanted to ask, what advice do you have for marine science students graduating with COVID, making it hard to find work?
Okay, so it's a tough one. I'm not going to lie, right? So one thing is, right now, the job market is possibly not at its peak, but don't give up, right? That's a key thing I would say is just don't give up believing. Because there are still jobs. It may be less jobs, but you are still competitive, right? I would say while you're waiting, don't waste time. There's so much opportunity in terms of learning. Like I'm doing online courses right now as well. I'm learning how to use R because I used MATLAB when I worked with Chari and I hated it, but I'm trying to get back to it. But it's not that I want to use it. I have teams of people who can do it, but I want to have certain skills, and this is a good time for skill building. Such a good time, right? There's a lot of space in our lives and things have slowed down. So do that. Even when you volunteer, even when it's not COVID-19, like if you ever want to build skills, volunteer to work with people, but to do the behind the scenes work, right? Like, so for me, one of my biggest grouses is that a lot of students want to come and be on my board, right? The reality is I don't spend, like we have a small period of a year that's on our board. But the most interesting work happens when we're at our desks, right? Because it's all data until we bring it together in a coherent story when we're at our computers. And the minute someone tells me they don't want to do that desk work, then I don't take them on. And that's my dirty little secret for you, which I want you to remember. I want anyone who's looking for a career to remember, you need to do all the bits, right? Not just the adventure and all the fun. So right now there are I've got a bunch of interns that work with me at the moment. And the good thing is nobody wants to be on my boat because I don't have a boat right now. Can't get out to sea, which is the only plus point is that no one can. I know when people are coming to me now, it's genuinely because they want experience and they want to learn and they want to contribute. So use this time wisely. Don't give up with the applications. Keep applying, but keep growing yourself and don't let yourself stagnate. I know people say it's okay not to be productive right now. It's okay. You know what though? If you are in a position to access the internet, to take time to learn, to have space for a little bit of leisure time, you're in a position of privilege right now. So use that well to grow yourself and to get yourself prepared for any minute when that opportunity knocks and you can open that door and run right through. So just believe in yourself and believe that it will happen. it'll happen as it's meant to happen as well, which is weird. And hindsight will serve you well also. So just believe.
Beautiful answer. We actually have another question just come through. This one's a little bit more technical.
Okay.
This one from Imizin. What can be done about coral decline in Sri Lanka? Are there any teams in Sri Lanka currently working on it?
Yeah, so coral decline with the bleaching problems. I mean, global bleaching events, right, affecting coral reefs everywhere. We've seen the impacts here in Sri Lanka. There are teams working on it. There are teams that have, for example, found small patches of coral reefs in the Bar Reef Marine Sanctuary on the northwest coast that weren't affected by the coral bleaching event, and they've cordoned that off to see kind of what will happen. There is some work around coral, but one of the biggest problems is that people just don't respect coral, and there's not a lot of enforcement around how people interact in the spaces where there is coral. And I think a lot of it's also down to policy, but then policy, we've got a lot of legal frameworks for everything, but I think it's also about making sure that people know more, because a lot of it is done out of a lack of awareness. So most people don't know coral is alive, right? They think it's a rock, so standing on it is cool because it's a rock.
Of course.
And that's part of the problem. So I think part of it is this awareness creation, and then part of it is the science of understanding, like, what does coral look like right now, and how we projecting to the future, how is it going to be able to survive everything that we as humans kind of inflict on it.
Beautiful. We actually have one more question, a little bit bigger. This one from Gary Kendrick, back on the theme of people flying in and doing the helicopter science. What is your view on international NGOs working in Sri Lanka? Are these NGOs like international scientists there one day, gone another?
So we have, in our space, there's one, hi Gary, in our space, there's one international NGO that's been around for a long time. The problem with international NGOs is that, so I'm talking from experience. I worked for one for a few years and I didn't enjoy it. I just felt that they were like tick boxing, right? So like the work was just to kind of accomplish some tasks. Also, when you look at an international NGO, they have multiple tiers. So you have the global headquarters, then you have the regional, and then you have the local country programs. And a lot of the funds actually come from the country programs and are sent upwards. So like people on the ground were and the country programs were doing work on very, very tiny budgets because most of that money is bulked up to send up the ladder, right? Which is unfortunate because then a lot of the work can't get done to the best capacity. So in my experience, I think a local NGO that's committed is far better to invest in and to work with than a big international NGO that comes with also more blanket objectives, right? So they'll have an objective that's kind of established at the top, at the global level, that just trickles down, and it's not necessarily modified to fit the ground situation. Whereas I think local NGOs are much better prepared to respond to the ground situation with local knowledge. And so kind of that's my viewpoint based on sort of my experiences. But thank you for that question. Thank you for all the questions. I really appreciate it.
They've been good. I've got one for you. So we actually never talked about this yet, and we do need to. We've got a picture up of your students with Oceanswell. Tell me about Oceanswell. When did it start? Why did you start it? What are you hoping to achieve?
Okay, I'm really excited. So Oceanswell is the nonprofit that I founded. I founded it in 2017. So just to kind of fill up my timeline a little bit, so I did, Sri Lanka, St. Andrews,
potatoes, tent, yeah.
Yeah, then New Zealand on the ocean. Then I went to Oxford, came back, worked for 3.5 years in the conservation NGO, and then went to started the Sri Lankan blue whale project. Met Chari by chance, which is all very weird because I had seen these blue whales. I wanted to understand how the environment was influencing them. I was Googling, found a Sri Lankan name, wanted to try to write him, asked the local oceanography if they knew him. They said, oh, he's coming next week. I was like, oh God, that's way too fast for me. And I'm filling this timeline up for a reason. And then, I ended up meeting him. He told me I could apply for the scholarship and I ended up at UWA, right? And then after UWA, I went straight into my postdoc at University of California, Santa Cruz. And then I was halfway through my postdoc. Like I had done 2 years and they were going to extend it for another year. And I was like, I'm done. And they were like, okay. And I was like, I'm off. I'm going back home. The time has come. And everyone was like, okay, that's interesting. Like, what are you going to do at home? And I was like, I'm going to serve, but this is the time I have to go. And they said, why? What do you mean by the time? And I said, I always knew that the time would be right when I had built enough of a global network and a support group that could find me no matter where I was in the world, right? And I think the biggest fear was if I went home and I didn't have any external collaborators or like opportunities beyond the borders, that I would stagnate. And I didn't want that to happen because I can't serve if I'm not like stimulated, right? And so then I just packed up and I moved back. And it just so happened that I got this Pew Fellowship in marine conservation at that time, which was perfect. And it wasn't how I expected it to happen. But so that funding was, I proposed that I would establish the first marine conservation research and education organization in Sri Lanka called Oceanswell. I had a logo and I had a tagline for it 2 years before that. So I was pretty committed to this.
So you knew exactly what you wanted.
Yeah, I knew what I wanted it to do. My dream was not to build a nonprofit. And I want to say it is really difficult and complicated for me. It's not, I'm just kind of like, some days I'm like, oh God, so many things I have to know. But the point was that
I think it was going to be quite easy.
Well, I mean, I thought you just built it, right? But you need lawyers and accountants and company secretaries and all these people you didn't know existed before, that you need them and they have to be whatever. Anyway, so the point being that, I set it up, and then the reason I built it was because I needed a home for myself, right? I was coming back. I knew I didn't fit in academia. I didn't fit in the academic model because I don't buy into the kind of constraints of it. I think I'm myself quite, I'm a storyteller, I'm creative, and I love the science, and I'm a conservationist. So I kind of bring a lot of different personalities, like a kind of multiple personality disorder issue, together. And that wouldn't have worked in a very traditional academic system. And on the flip side, the existing NGOs, which we just mentioned, were just not my cup of tea. I had had my experience with them. It wasn't what I wanted.
Okay, so you didn't like the model.
No, and I wanted to build something that also created space for that next generation of people who wanted to try out what marine conservation was and get involved and become kind of like those ocean heroes, no matter what their background was. And so Oceanswell was born, and we do tons of things that allow people, like, you'd think I have a 100-person team, but I don't. I'm finding that out, okay? But we do a lot of different things, right? So from the marine conservation research side, we've been working long-term with the blue whales, conservation particularly, where, the big threat is that they get hit by ships and get killed. And we've been working on this. We've got science. We're working with, at the policy level, trying to really push government to create changes that can safeguard these whales. We work with sperm whales and looking at kind of culture and how to protect them better, because they've got these amazing, complex social structures that I would encourage everyone to learn a bit about. We work with shark fisheries, trying to understand what's driving it and stuff like that. And these have collaborators externally who are helping to build capacity locally, right? That's the model we run. And we've got a few other projects in terms of fisheries and stuff like that too, right? Then on the other side, we have the education component. And by education, I mean, it's everything from outreach, so doing things like public talks, to running these like courses, and there's opportunities, building online courses. We're building a marine conservation online course that's tailor-made to the Sri Lankan example so that it feels more relatable for our students. Then we also have things like, we have these 2 series, like during Corona, like we were like, okay, we need to keep people excited about the ocean. We started a series called Ocean Creature Features, where we featured these really wild and wacky creatures from the ocean. And we did these short videos with activity packs for kids. We did 10 episodes. We have a thing called Tiny Desk Adventures that's going on right now, which is really about taking people on an amazing adventure from their little desks. So we have so far had polar divers, plankton specialists, people who study turtle aribadas. Today we released Sri Lankan shipwrecks. We've got a whole host of amazing people. And then we do a live Q&A as well. So I want people in these parts of the world to like familiarize themselves with what's possible and just meet people, right? Like have a chance to like not feel like they have to flip through National Geographic and just like, oh, I wish I was them, or I wish I could have a conversation. Like, here's your chance, right? And then on the other side, we do the public stuff, which is other public stuff. So I have this monthly event called Marine Conservation Conversations, which is basically a science journal club for the public. So they sign up, anybody, and I'll tell you our audience is, we have bakers, accountants, artists, students. We have this wide range of people. Nobody really has a marine conservation background apart from me. And we send out a paper, and it's a marine conservation scientific article. The goal is I want people to realize that science is for everyone. You do not need a degree. You don't have to be like a PhD to engage with science and to understand it. I obviously pick papers that are readable. There's a lot of bad papers in this world.
It's a good quality only.
Right? And like really interesting things. And then we sit around, right? And normally right now we're holding it online, obviously, but normally it's in an intimate space. There's always cake. Cake is like a standard.
Oh my goodness. Can I go? Am I allowed? Right. Thank you. I'll just join on Zoom. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay. You have to bring your own cake. We have a session tomorrow, actually. So do look it up. It's about slavery at sea, which is really interesting as a marine conservation problem. But so we sit together and we break down these papers together. So it's a safe space for people to kind of like engage and bring in their stories and experiences, but also to like break down the science together. I've learned so much, right? I've learned. Like the words I take for granted are like words I take for granted because I live in this space and I want to, if I want to relate to the world, I kind of have to know how to break it down. So it's one of my favorite things that we do.
What a huge transformation though, like from when you were growing up, literally nobody around that you could refer to. And now here you are actively by yourself, bringing up all these people around. It's amazing.
I've got some amazing people working with me now. And I think it's been like the most fulfilling thing has been to see that there are more young people wanting to go into marine biology, go into marine conservation. It's like a thing now, right? Like it's a career path. You don't have to be just a doctor, lawyer, engineer, which is what,
of course,
right? You can be useful
or
as
a fisherwoman.
Yeah, exactly, or a fisherwoman, right? Because at least there's an income there. Whatever. So unimportant, but no. But I think it's that opportunity for people to realize that it's real. It's a job. You can have immense impact on the planet. You can be passionate. You can live an amazing life. I think I have the best life in the world, right? And I may be biased.
Sounds pretty good.
I definitely think so. And I get to meet amazing people. I get to just sit and brainstorm with people. I get to go visit places, right? I live a life out of passion. And that's not to say it's not a hard life. It's a hard slog. It's a lot of work, but it's totally worth it in the end, right? I get up every day with a big smile on my face thinking, what can I do today? What's the idea I can generate? And I have a team that's right now, really supportive, and all these things are possible because I can delegate and like, hey, can you work on this? Can you work on this? And we can bring it together, right? So it's nice to see more people wanting to work in this space as well, because that means we can expand what we do and kind of broaden. And we have interns from places like Harvard, from Stanford, wanting to come and work with us, right? So as volunteers, right? So like that's the dream, right? It's people believe, and the point is people believe in the mission. And that's what you want people to believe in the mission, and they won't believe in the mission unless you believe in the mission. And I think that's the key thing.
That's beautiful and very passionate. I've just got a question that's related on that topic. We're talking a lot about your lowlights, and now we're finally coming to a part of your life where you seem to be pretty happy with your achievements. We're long past the 10. There are no sheep and no fields. What is the most exciting, proudest finding to come out of your Blue Whale research? So, the one thing that makes you think, oh my God, I've made it as a researcher. I'm a legit scientist. It's
a good one. So this is kind of ridiculous, but I'll tell you, the big one that really kind of shook people was when we discovered that, and this was, thank you, whale poop, that the blue whales in Sri Lanka actually, so if you Google what do blue whales eat, it always says krill, right? But we found that the blue whales in Sri Lanka actually eat kind of shrimp. And that shrimp, it doesn't matter if you know the difference between the krill and shrimp, but the point is these shrimp are deep in the water column, which explains why these whales lift the tail flukes up before a deep dive more often than anywhere else in the world. And I think that's really important because I'll tell you, the reason why I think it's exciting is because it reminds us that we can't get complacent about what's out there, and we have to treat each population as an individual entity. They have different adaptations and needs, and that's why we have to invest in studying them, not just from the blanket level, but like really deep diving in specific areas of the world. Our blue whales are unique. They have different vocal call. They have, they feed on different things, different behaviors, and that's really important to how we manage and protect them. And I think, so that finding was really exciting. But I have one other finding that's been really exciting, and I'm going to slip that in. And that was, a few years ago, we recorded an Omuraz whale here in Sri Lanka. And it was the first time it was sort of described in Sri Lanka or documented. And this is kind of ridiculous because it's a 30-foot whale. And it's a pretty big animal. And it's been seen in other parts of the world. We just hadn't documented it in the central part of the Indian Ocean. And so this was the first thing. It was the first time documented in Sri Lanka. Super exciting. But what excited me most was the fact that, we were overlooking a giant that was 30 feet long, right? And I realized that this animal is in our waters. We've just never really noticed it. But if we're overlooking these giants, then what else are we overlooking, right? All those other important tiny things in the water. And that reminds me that there's so much left to discover and so much more work to do. And we need so many people on board, which is why building capacity is the only way we're going to make a difference. And my tagline is if you really want to save the oceans, every coastline needs a local hero. And I truly believe that.
That's a beautiful thing. I feel like that's our cue to end the conversation. Every coastline needs a local hero. Can I get that on a t-shirt? Would that be your next line of merchandise?
Sign it.
Oh, that's beautiful. I was going to finish up by asking a couple of questions. Number one, you do so much. You do an inhuman amount to the point where I'm just like, what is going on in your life and how do I ever measure up to this standard? There's you, the researcher, there's your educational foundation, all the work that you do there. There's the pro bono speaking that you seem to do for the joy of doing it. How do you balance this? But then number two, how do you decide which things you can say yes to?
Yeah, so I'll be very honest. I was worse now. I'm better. I was worse in the past. I'm better now at learning to say no. And I think that's a skill that we never teach, that we don't talk about, and we have to talk about, because we have to learn to say no. Because we assume that if we don't say yes, we're not going to progress. And that is not true, because we're more likely to burn out before we progress, right? So I have got to the point in my life where I have learned that I will only do things that I'm truly passionate about. I will only do things that I know will have impact and that will allow others to live their best lives, right? So whether that's talking and inspiring people or teaching or doing science that can have a better impact on the planet, those are the things that really make me excited. But balance is difficult. But I try to create a lot of Asha time in my day, and I think that's something that we also don't necessarily talk about. I remember when I was at UW, I was being interviewed for something, and they said, "Oh, you must." And this was the early part of like this kind of trajectory that I'm on, when I wasn't really as busy either. And they said, "Oh, you must be a workaholic." And I was like, "No, I don't describe myself as a workaholic. I believe I wake up. I'm an early bird, so I'm up at 4:30. I meditate a little bit, and then I set out for my sports. So I'm a triathlete, so I'll do." Not necessarily competitive, but I run, I swim, and I cycle. I fit those in the day. And then I kind of like have breakfast and roll into my day. So I don't necessarily engage with work. I mean, in my brain, yes, but not like physically, like going mental on the computer, right? None of that. And then I work, and then I basically, like at about 6 o'clock, I realize that my brain's just not.
It's the end.
Right? And I'm okay with that, because I think I've worked myself to the bone. I think I try to be as efficient as possible in the time that I have at my desk. But once my laptop's shut, I usually don't engage with it. And non-COVID times, evenings are, anyway, now also I live with my family. So I spend my evening with my parents. I like to have meals together, others with my friends, or some sport, or just a walk on my own. But I do have components of the day which are only for me, which is when I do my morning stuff. I'm very ritualistic as well. And then in the evening I'll have, and I think that's all the stuff that helps me to kind of take space and not feel overwhelmed and just feel like, oh my God, I have to say yes to everything because my life, and don't let anyone, and this is advice to anybody, especially younger people, don't let anyone tell you that this is good for your career and that's why we want you to do it, right? You have to know that it's good for your career. No one else can tell you if it's good for your career, because if they're saying that.
Well, they don't know what your career is going to be like.
Exactly. And oftentimes they want something for free or they're exploiting it. And remember, being self-sustainable is not a shame, right? So I actually, and this shocks people because I'm a scientist as well, but I have an agent who handles all my documentary work and all my speaking engagement. And I have people who've tried to shame me for it, who've been like, oh God, what, you have an agent, but you're just a scientist. And I'm like, well, it's cool. If you don't want my services, go for it. Yeah. And I'm like, like I have to be sustainable. I can't give away everything for free all the time. I choose, and I will do pro bono, right? When I think there's an audience that I think I'm very attached to, connected to students very much. But otherwise, I also think I have a right to, survive and earn my keep and live a healthy life. And if other people, do that and they don't give their work away for free, I don't either. So never be ashamed, right, of your self-worth, and value yourself. Value everything you do.
Well, I value you. And I value the time that you've given us today, because it's very special indeed. I'm fully aware it's been an amazing experience. One final question. You mentioned every coastline needs a local hero. What are the top, let's say, 3 things you want that local hero to do? What are the things that we can all do to make a difference?
Okay, so I always say my top, like we always talk about like being conscious of your footprint, your single-use plastics and stuff like that. We talk about, and that stuff everybody talks about, and I could tell you top 3, but most of them will be repeated, right? But the top 1 I want everybody to do, and I think it's so simple, right? So help me get to my ultimate goal in life, which is I want everyone on the planet to talk about the oceans at least once a day, right? That is my ultimate goal in life. And so that means share the stories, right? If you've heard something about the oceans that makes you excited or intrigues you, or maybe even makes you think twice, tell one other person. We need more people to care for this. We need more local heroes. And if we're not being inclusive by giving them that information, sharing those stories, we're never going to achieve anything for our oceans. So my top 1 is share the stories. Allow people to dream about this amazing space, and let them know it's in trouble and it can only be saved by all of us coming together, all of us living along these coastlines, being empowered to make that difference, and that everyone can be part of the solution and not just part of the problem.
It's 6:40. I feel like we could talk forever, but I think we'll have to leave it there. A great way to end, perfect way to end. You heard her. Share the story, share your experience today, share this link. If you enjoyed the show, please do like, comment, subscribe, do all the things that you need to do to keep it going. We are going to end it here. If you have any more questions for Asha, obviously get in touch with her on her website, ashadevos.com.
No, so it's my Oceanswell website, which is oceanswell.org. But also we're on social media. So I have my Asha De Vos social media, but also Oceanswell.org. Follow us and follow our adventure. We've got tons of really exciting stuff lined up. We're a tiny team having big ripple effects across the world, and I want you guys to join us.
Please do. I think this is absolutely the end. Thank you so much, Asha, for your time today, and thank you everybody for joining us. Let's wave goodbye.
Thank you.
And hopefully
Bye-bye.
we'll start a conversation. Bye-bye, folks. Thank you so much.